Hello again and welcome to another Imperial Guard Tactics video. Now today guys, I would like to say a big thank you to Michael Fisher for sending in an awesome picture of his repainted old school Cajun commander. Really like the paint scheme that you've done on this model. And I have to say, this is probably my favourite sculpt for Imperial Guard officer. It's just so classic. Everything about the model just screams Imperial Guard. I absolutely love it. The augmetic eye, the stiff back, the power sword, the fancy uniform, yet, military gear. To me, it is Imperial Guard through and through. So thank you for sending this picture in, Michael. Real blast from the past. One of my favourite sculpts. If anyone else has got any cool pictures they want me to use in my videos, please post them on my Facebook page. There will be a link down in the description below. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's video. Now, what I want to talk about today, guys, is Imperial Guard, Astra Militarum, and 9th edition. So, I've played 2 games of 9th edition now, and they have made a huge difference into my understanding of the edition and how it's going to interact with the Imperial Guard. I've also done extensive research by watching other people's battles, reading lots and lots of blog posts, just marinating myself in just everything to do with 9th edition and the Imperial Guard. And so I've drawn some interesting conclusions. Now, I would say that until I actually went and played a couple of games myself, I didn't quite fully understand how the secondaries and the primaries, when it comes to match play, would affect the Guard. But after playing a couple of games, it has become very clear to me that Guard has some extreme weaknesses in 9th, but also has the potential for some very extreme strengths. So that's what we're going to go through now. What the Guard is good at and bad at when it comes to playing 9th edition, and what you need to consider. You need to consider this when you're going to be building your list and take into account how the new missions work. So the first thing that's really important to understand when you're talking about 9th edition and the Guard is how the primary and secondary missions work. So when it comes to primaries, they all play pretty much the same. There's a slight variation whether there's 6 objectives on the board or whether there's 4 objectives on the board. And that does make a big difference, but that's really it. You've got different deployment, but they are fixed for each mission. And the way you score points is the same. So if you hold 1 objective, you get 5 points. If you hold 2 objectives, you get 10 points. And if you hold more objectives, you get 15 points. Now, there's only 5 turns in the game, and you can't score turn 1, which means that you have 4 chances to score objectives in 9th edition. You've got turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5. Okay, that's for your primary missions. Your secondary missions, you can score from turn 1. There's no, unless it says otherwise, there's no restriction. So now, the thing with primary missions is that it's been... First thing I want to do when it comes to primary missions is I want to cut through some of the bullshit that's been going on online, where people have been saying, oh yeah, 9th edition is good for elite armies, but if you're a horde army, you're going to have great board control. The thing with the way the primary missions work, that is, unless you have board control to such a massive extent, it won't actually impact your opponent. You see, all your opponent has to do is hold 2 objectives out of potentially 6 objectives for them to almost max out their primary points. If they sit on 2 objectives for the whole game, and they just castle up on 2 objectives, then they will get 40 out of a possible 45 primary points. However, if you as the Guard player, let's say you're playing a 6 objective mission, if you sit on 4 objectives for every turn of the game, you only get 45 points because primary mission points cap at 45. So even though in theory, for 4 turns, you would have more objectives than your opponent, so you would get 15 points every turn, which would bring you up to 60 victory points. In theory, that does, in reality, that doesn't happen because you can't score more than 45 primary mission points. So once you've dominated the board for 3 turns, you get no more benefit. So that last turn is wasted. So actually, in a funny sort of way, turn 1 is wasted because it doesn't matter if you control 1 objective or 10 objectives, it doesn't matter. Turn 2, turn 3 and turn 4 you'll score primary, but then turn 5 you might as well not hold any objectives in a funny sort of way. So unless you're absolutely... So that's on a 6 mission objective. Obviously on a 4 mission objective, I think it's much more important to have board control when you're just playing 4 missions, and I'll get into that in a moment. So just cut through this sort of this wrong think about how this sort of, I'd say, this misunderstanding of how the primary works. Essentially, unless you control either 75% of the objectives or 80 if you're playing a 4 objective game, or you control 84% of the objectives if you're playing a 6 objective game, because you have to control 5 out of 6, you're not really going to have an impact on your opponent, because your opponent will just sit there and rack up nearly full primary, because he just needs 2 objectives, guys. He just needs 2. And when you're playing a 6 objective game, that's really easy for your opponent to do. And when you're playing 6 objectives, all you have to do is hold 2 of them, and you're good to go. And we're talking about from your opponent's perspective, all right? Now, the way primary missions, basically, the problem with primary missions is that if both sides sit on, let's say you're playing a 6 objective game, both sides sit on 2 objectives and contest 2 objectives, you both get 40 points. So, doesn't really matter. And if one guy sits on 3 objectives and one guy sits on 2 objectives and 1 is contested, then it still doesn't really matter, because all you get is 5 more points than your opponent if you're the guard player sitting on 3 objectives. So what you have to do, 9th edition primaries, what's really important, this is the first thing you have to learn, okay? Before we even get into guard specific, this is the first thing you have to learn about 9th edition primaries, is it's not about how many you control, it's about how many you can deny your opponent. You need to come up with some strategy that allows you to sit, not to sit on like 3 or 4 objectives, but to make sure your opponent only sits on 1 or non-objectives. The moment your opponent is allowed to sit on 2 objectives, he's basically on equal footing in terms of board control with you. No matter what mission you're playing, if your opponent, you could control all the board, but your opponent just castles around this objective, so you never get it. Objective 1 and objective 2. Even if you control all the land around him, he's still going to get max, almost max primary. Anyway, not going to repeat myself anymore. I hope that makes sense. So, like I said, it's not about how many you hold. It's about how many you can stop your opponent from holding. Because if you can make sure that your opponent only really has access to 1 objective all game, the most points you can get is 20. And the most points you'll have is 45. So that means you're 25 points in the lead. Even if you just deny your opponent, let's say you just deny your opponent for 2 turns, you put everything you've got into it, and for 2 turns you deny your opponent, and he's only able to sit on 1 objective. But then for turns 4 and turns 5, he's able to sit on 2 objectives. If you do that, your opponent's only on 30 points, which means you are still 15 points in the lead, which is good, which is very, very good. So that's the first thing to remember, guys. First thing that I learned when I was playing my games. Now, so that's what you need to understand from primary. Okay, now the second thing you need to learn is secondaries. Now, guard will have no problem scoring secondary objectives. Okay, there's a whole smorgasbord of secondaries for you to choose from. I like raise the banners high, because if you're going for that primary board control, you're probably going to be able to get lots and lots of raise the banner points. If you're playing a 4 objective mission, you'll probably want to go for I would probably say I would go for raise banners high in both a 4 objective and a 6 objective. In a 6 objective mission, it's really easy to get it, because you can just concentrate on half the objectives and raise your banners every turn. And you can max it out pretty much guaranteed by the end of turn 5. So with raise the banners, I would say that it is a really good one for guard to go for. Out of the 3 holding, I'd go for raise the banners. You can also consider repair teleporter Homer, because you could take a unit of Bulgrins and just like a really cheap character, like a platoon commander or something, outflank them just via strategic reserve, spend a CP to outflank them, and then what happens is you come on the enemy's deployment zone, sort of turn 3, and you just set at the teleporter homer and you get yourself like sort of 10-15 points. That's one way of doing it, or you could use Scions to deep strike in and do it. Basically, your character can score, can set the teleporter homer whilst your units, whatever you decide to protect him with, will screen for him. You know, like I said, Ogrins, Bulgars are pretty good for that. Now, there's loads of other ones you can pick. Engage North Front is a really good one for guard. A lot of people said, oh, that would be really hard to get. It just isn't, because we have things like move. And you score Engage North Front at the end of your movement phase or end of your turn. Basically, you don't have to wait to the next command phase. So you can sprint those guys into one of each table quarter. You can, and you get your 3 points at the end of your phase, and your opponent can't stop you. So that's why Engage North Front is a good one for guard if you've got lots of little squads that you can fling into table quarters. So there's, like I said, loads of options. So as guard, you're not going to struggle to score secondaries. The problem is, as guard, is we will hemorrhage secondary points to our opponents so easily. Okay, and this comes down to one simple mistake that I believe Games Workshop has made. They haven't put all the kill objectives in one category. They've split them out. Specifically, they've put the objective thin their ranks in a separate category to assassinate and big game hunter. Okay, or bring it down. I can't remember what it is. There's one for scoring objectives. Now, let me go through it quickly to explain why that is such a killer for guard. Why it is honestly means that your opponent could easily score, and I mean easily, score 30 objective points off you without even secondary objectives, without even really trying. Okay, so assassinate is for each character you kill. Not even if you kill, for each character that is destroyed at the end of your turn. So, even if your opponent takes a Pales test, gets sucked into the warp and dies, or a vehicle explodes and takes them out, you still get the points for it. So for each enemy character that is destroyed at the end of your turn, you gain 3 points. That, I think, is a really silly objective, because it means that if someone kills a platoon commander, they get 3 points. If someone kills Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, Magnus, the Demon Primarch of Tzeentch, of Thousand Suns, they get 3 points. In a lot of other objectives throughout the secondaries, there's this like cap where it's like, if it's a big thing, you get 3 objectives. If you kill a big thing, you get 3 points. If you kill a little thing, you get 2 points. Big Game Hunter is an example of that. Thin their ranks or something similar. But with Assassinate, it's just 3 points, no matter who you kill. Now, guard armies are really reliant on character support. Okay? Which means your opponent can very easily kill 5 guard characters. They can't. So what that means is we really have to protect our characters. And I'll get into how we can do it in a minute, but just think about that for a second. When you actually look back at your Imperial Guard army, how many characters do you have? You might say, well, I've only got a couple of company commanders. Yeah, alright then. What about those tank commanders that you like to take? Everyone loves to take 3 tank commanders, right? They're 3 points each. You can't screen them. Tank commanders will be a great firepower unit, but the moment your opponent sees you've taken 3 tank commanders and you've got a couple of other cheap characters you can snipe out, if he doesn't take Assassinate, he's doing something wrong. Now you might think, well, I like to play an armoured list. I only have 3 tank commanders and the rest of my Russes and Chimeras are... the rest of my vehicles are regular Russes and regular Chimeras. Well, in that case, what your opponent will do is pick Bring It Down. Because for Bring It Down, for each vehicle you kill that's got 11 wounds or more, you get 3 points. Now, I don't know about you, but every guard army, every hybrid guard army that I've seen has normally got 6 vehicles. 6 or 7. You know, most good guard armies which will turn up to tournaments will have 3 tank commanders and 3 basilisks, and then maybe even like a couple of chimeras. You know, but regardless of the composition, we all know that guard armies love tanks. So if you're against a hybrid guard list, you got, even in a hybrid guard list, someone's going to be able to bring it down. Well, then you might say, well, if someone might be able to max bring it down against me, but they can't. I don't have that much infantry. I've only got like 60 or 70 infantry, so I won't give up that many thin their ranks points. Now, here's what you have. This is the key thing. Thin their ranks is separate to Big Game Hunter or Bring It Down. I'm sorry, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. We'll say Big Game Hunter going forward. So when you read how thin their ranks works, it suddenly becomes clear how bad it is. So thin their ranks is, for every model you kill that has less than 10 wounds, you get a tally. But if you kill something that has 10 or more wounds, you get 10 tallies. Okay. At the end of the game, you add all your tallies up and you divide it by 10. And that is the number of secondary mission points you score. Essentially, for every 10 tallies, you get a point. So if you wipe out an infantry squad that's got 10 models in it, you get a point. If you wipe out a Chimera or Lehman Russ, that's a full secondary victory point. So suddenly, when you realise that, you realise how boned guard are. Because if you turn up to the battlefield with a hybrid standard normal guard force, let's say you turn up with the equivalent of 80 or 90 infantry. You know, you've got your 6 infantry squads. Maybe you've got some veterans. You've got heavy weapon teams. Don't forget those heavy weapon teams are all a tally as well. Once you add all the models into account, you're looking at like 100 wounds on infantry. But then you've also got 6 or 7 vehicles. That's pretty reasonable, right? I think we could all say that we've turned up to a battle with 90 to 100 infantry when you take all the support card stuff into account. And, 6 or 7 vehicles. That was pretty normal. It might be a little smaller in 9th, but that's still pretty normal. What that means is for each one, then your opponent looks at the army and he goes, right, I'm going to take thin their ranks and I'm going to take big game hunters. That means for every vehicle that your opponent kills, he gets 3 points for big game and he gets 1 point for thin their ranks. So if your opponent, for every vehicle you take in the guard, you're giving your opponent 4 secondary points. That's mad. It's absolutely mad. And because most guard vehicles have no invuns, but have high toughness and high wounds, it means that unless you're running a sentinel, every guard vehicle you can take will give your opponent 4 victory points. Now, he's not even thinning your... Even if you turned up with a pure armoured force, and you're like, I've got 12 tanks, what are you going to do? It's like, well, he's going to max out big game really quickly, and if he kills the rest of your tanks, he's still getting 12 out of 15 of the anti-horde objective, which is thin their ranks. Thin their ranks is meant to be designed for like, oh, I'm going to kill your horde. But it's actually really, really bad for mechanized and armoured armies. So if you run a mechanized force and you're like, well, I've got 6 chimeras with infantry in and 3 tank commanders, each one of those chimeras still represents 4 points, because you've got 2 points for big game, you've got a point for the squad inside for thin their ranks, and a point for the chimera itself for thin their ranks. So I'm not going to go into it anymore, guys, but basically the problem with a normal guard army in 9th is that you hemorrhage secondaries. You really hemorrhage them. So this all sounds pretty doom and gloom, right? This all sounds pretty doom and gloom. Well, the thing is now that you know this, the task of every guard commander when you're going into a mission is not to think too hard on what you can score, because you're going to be okay. It's what can I stop my enemy from scoring off me? And I think ninth, a lot of people have seen ninth as, oh yeah, you can score, you can score, you can score. Ninth is not necessarily, from a guard perspective, about what we can score. We'll be okay, we'll score pretty highly. But what ninth is about for guard is how we can deny our opponent's points. That is more important. When you're building a list, don't be thinking, I can score that objective, I can score that secondary. Don't be thinking about that as much. Alright? Just be looking at what can I stop my opponent from getting off me. Because if you're not careful, your opponent can very easily get max secondaries and then just get normal primaries. So for example, if you look at the Dark Elder game that I had, my opponent chose Assassinate and Thin Their Ranks. My opponent was easily able, because I was unfamiliar with how powerful Assassinate and Thin Their Ranks were as a combination. But imagine if I had 5 tanks, imagine if those 5 tanks, instead of Assassinate, he'd gone for Bring It Down, and I had some vehicles. My opponent was able to easily max out 2 of his secondary objectives by doing nothing else than what he would normally have done, which is kill stuff. At the end of the day, 40k is about killing your opponent's models, killing your opponent's army. So if you take that combination of Thin Their Ranks and Bring It Down or Assassinate versus Guard, your opponent doesn't even need to try and take ground or think about complicated secondaries or anything like that. Your opponent just needs to kill you. And this is the problem. This is the problem that Guard face in ninth, which is your opponent doesn't have to think too hard about how to score points off you. If you don't build your list around it, your opponent, without thinking, just by killing stuff, will max out a lot of his secondaries. And then all he has to do is focus on one of the other secondaries, like Line Breaker or Engagement or Front, and he'll probably max out his secondaries without much effort. So please, if you take anything away from this video, think about how you can deny your opponent victory points. As a Guard player, that is what's important. As a Marine player, it's not that hard. It's not that easy to score points against Marines by killing stuff. They only have like 30 infantry, so Thin Their Ranks isn't that much. They're only going to be taking a single battalion, so Assassinate doesn't help. And most Marine armies will only be turning up with 2 or 3 vehicles. You know, a couple of dreadnoughts, like Redemptor dreadnoughts, or a couple of repulsors. You know, Marines don't give up secondaries. Guard give up secondaries hard. So, now that you know this, now you know this crucial, important bit of information, what can you do to stop it? Well, there's 2 approaches you can have that two approaches to stop hemorrhaging secondaries. One is you build your list almost like a Marine list. So you don't take, if you're taking 3 tank commanders, you take no other vehicles. Okay, none. You make sure that you're not taking more than really sort of 30 infantry. That's it. Make sure that combined, you're taking less than 3. You know, you're not taking. If you take 3 vehicles, the rest of your models combined make up less than 70 models. Okay, you take what essentially is a small elite Guard army. Example who do really well in this is Pure Scions, amazingly. Pure Scions, those Torx Primes, they're less than 10 wounds. They only give up 2 victory points each for Big Game Hunter. You can take 5 of those things, no problem. Rest of your Scions, you're all going to be running 5-man squads. You know, Scions are going to turn up with 6 5-man squads, 4 command squads, and 3 Tempesta Primes, and then 5 Tauroxes. If you turn up with that, you're golden. You're not gonna. That's a really elite army. It's not gonna give up too many secondaries. Good times. For regular Guard, what you're going to be looking at is 3 tank commanders. But I don't want to be taking too many more infantry after 3 tank commanders, because otherwise, for every tank commander that they kill, if they take Bring It Down and if they take Big Game Hunter and Thin the Ranks, it's 4 points. So you've got to make sure that your opponent can't get more than 10 points within their ranks. So what you're going to turn up with is basically lots of small Guard units. So your troops are probably going to be some 3 infantry squads or lots of Scions. But really what you want to be considering is if you still really want to take like a hybrid guard army, you're really going to be looking at lots of Bulgrins or Ogrins or models similar to them. Because a Bulgrin is really tough. They didn't really get much of a point rise in 9th. I think if you take them with the Slab Shield and Bulgrin Maul, they went up by 1 point, which isn't much. And they're hard to shift, and your opponent for killing 9 Bulgrins only gets 9 small tallies. Doesn't even get a full victory point. So, and if you watch my battle report, 1 squad of Bulgrins was able to absorb pretty much an entire Dark Elder army shooting phase. That's impressive. The combination of toughness 5, invulnerable saves. I didn't even get my 3 up invuln up. I only had a 4 up. And just having lots of wounds. You know, Bulgrins are going to be essential. I think if you want to run like a hybrid guard army, you're going to be looking at least 9. I'd maybe consider 18 Bulgrins, maybe 12. You want to be considering between 9 and 18 Bulgrins. But the point is that army, if you think about the army, it's 3 tank commanders, it's 30 or 40 infantry, and then a big block of Bulgrins, and that's it. That's like some heavy weapon teams and stuff. It doesn't really feel like a guard army, does it? That's the problem. It doesn't feel like a guard army. So the other way you approach it is like this, which is you're going to give up certain points, so you only allow your opponent to max out one of those killing objectives. Okay, so let's say no matter what you do, the problem is if you turn it with a standard guard army, as we've already said, you're going to give away Thin the Ranks and Big Game Hunter really easily. Really easily. So instead, you have to be like, I only want to give up one of those. I only want to give up one of them. So you either want to be like, right, I only want to give up Thin their ranks. In which case, you go pure infantry. You go pure infantry and you're like, yeah, I know I'm turning up to the battlefield with 200 blokes, 250 infantry, but my opponent will only be able to get 15 points within their ranks, and that I'm going to be denying him on loads of primaries. I'm not going to let him get anywhere near my characters. Now you might be like, well, how do I stop him getting near my officers? My officers need to be within 6 inches of my infantry. Well, guys, I know it sounds like pure heresy, but I think Games Workshop has finally made an environment in which Voxcasters are fucking essential, because you don't want your officers anywhere near the front line. You don't want them anywhere near danger whatsoever. Bulgrin bodyguards aren't an option because they're characters as well. So if you do go near the front line, your opponent kills a Bulgrin bodyguard, he still gets an assassinate point. So what you do, because you take pure infantry, your opponent will go, right, assassinate within their ranks. So you have to stop him from getting assassinate. So you take your 3 company commanders, you take your 3 platoon commanders, you just sit them 18 inches behind the front lines, and they just Voxcaster away. And with the changes to eliminators and other sniping units, there's a lot less sniping units out there at the moment, beginning of 9th, and the ones that are out there have kind of been taking a big hit in costs. Like eliminators are not an auto include anymore. The thing is that your opponent then can't score assassinate. Like if I'd been able to deny my opponent assassinate in my Dark Elder game, Dark Elder Guard game, I would have won. But I was foolish. I didn't have any Voxcasters. I had too many things like Commissars and Priests, which were just easy kill points for my opponent to scoop up. So what I should have done is just been like, all my officers at the back, I'm not going to worry about morale too much, because morale isn't as big a deal, potentially. It's not as automatic morale now. And I'm just going to be issuing loads and loads of orders. So Voxcasters are really, really good. If you're going tank heavy, you're like, right, I am only going to take maximum of like 10 vehicles, and I'm not. The thing is, I don't think tank heavy can do it, because if you've got 10 vehicles and 60 infantry, for example, or if you've got 10 vehicles, your opponent can still get 10 Thin the Rank points off you. So I actually think what's crazy, guys, is Games Workshop has tried to nerf guard infantry. They've really tried to nerf it. And I think the mad thing is that I think pure infantry guard might still be the top tier competitive guard choice. It's really, really mad. I mean, I'll need more battlefield data. My first impressions are you can't deny your enemy from blowing vehicles up because you can't, like, they haven't all got the character keyword, have they, for example? So you can't stop them, but you can stop your opponent from killing your guardsmen, your infantry characters, because you can wrap them in infantry and then lookout sir kicks in. So it's really interesting. I think pure infantry might be the way to go. Now, another reason why I'm going to push this pure infantry mad idea, in addition which is supposed to be anti-horde, is that it comes down to what I was talking about before at the beginning, which is primary objectives. A mixed guard army is going to struggle to make it onto 5 out of 6 objectives in a 6 objective game. You'll struggle to do it. Okay, but a pure infantry army, if there's 5 objectives, I can easily take 200 models, and I mean easily. Like, I've worked out my go-to guard armies, like, still. It depends if I want to spend CP tax or if I want to spend Sentinel tax, basically. But I'm running easily 240 to 250 infantry, easily, and I'm not really even looking at conscripts to do that. I'm looking at 240 infantry, no conscripts. Okay, so the reason why that's important is because I can be like, right, it's 5 objectives I need to go on. I've got about 250 infantry, so I'm going to assign 50 infantry to each objective. First turn, I've all got Foxcasters. My first turn, I'm just going to move on. All I have to do to get a significant lead in objectives is to deny my opponent objectives for 2 turns. That's all I need to do. So either I get on them turns 2 and turns 3, and my opponent only gets to score on them turn 4 and turn 5, or I manage to get onto them turns 4 and turns 5 and stop my opponent in the later game. But all I need to do to get a significant lead in primary is have 2 turns when my opponent only has 1 objective. That's all I need to do. If I can achieve that, I've achieved a solid lead. I've achieved 45 points, my opponents have achieved 30 points. And pure infantry guard, I could take a brigade and a battalion, and I could take creed, so I get a couple of command points back, so it doesn't really cost me anything. And then I can spend those couple of command points to then outflank 60 infantry, because it's only 3 power level per infantry squad, and you can outflank up to 19 power level for 2 CP. So definitely going to do that. And so I can have 30 run onto one objective, 30 run onto another objective. I know you have to start the movement phase away from the objectives, but I can then move in the shooting phase. And that means that I can deny, my opponent will then have to blast off 30 infantry from one objective, 30 infantry from another objective, which is, he can do that, don't get me wrong, it's possible. But don't forget, if your opponent's someone like Marines, and they're like, I'm going to move my 5 intercessors onto that objective, well, it's like, even if you have 5 guys, even if you run 30 guardsmen onto that objective, your opponent has to kill 26 guardsmen for him to have control of that objective. That's all he needs. That's what he has to do, which isn't super easy. I mean, 5 intercessors won't kill 26 guardsmen in 1 turn. Okay, even if they hit and wound with every attack, they won't kill 26 guardsmen. They'll kill 10 in the shooting phase, and if they hit and wound with everything in the charge phase, they've got 3 attacks each. So that's 15 attacks. So, and the sergeant's got an extra one. So I suppose if every single one of those attacks from the shooting phase and the combat phase hits and kills a guardsman, then your opponent would be able to win in that 5 versus 30 situation. And don't forget, intercessors are 100 points. Your 3 guardsman squads are 150 points bare bones. So yes, it is 50 points more you're committing, but the reality is that it's more like it's more like 20 guardsmen would still be able to achieve it. 20 guardsmen would probably be able to do it, but 30 means it's safe. 30 guarantees it, because you've put 50 more points into that, taking that objective in a funny sort of way. Now obviously your opponent could shoot you off and he's got other things, but then you're probably going to put more than 30 guardsmen onto that objective, aren't you? So it's really interesting, and that is basically how you want to be looking at guard. That is, I've not gone into specifics about weapon choices, points, anything like that. We're going to be following that up in another video this week. But what I want to talk about today, guys, was just guard and the objectives. How to score objectives. How to win on the objective front when it comes to the guard. Summary thoughts, guys. As guard, you're going to have no problem picking up things like raise the banners, engage in all fronts. If your opponent brings some vehicles, you'll be able to pick up things like big game hunter, or line break is another good one you can do. I mean, one thing you want to consider is, you know, if you take a bunch of scions and you deep strike them into the enemy lines 3 turns in a row, you will get 12 line breaker points, which is really good, because line breaker isn't scored just at the end of the game, it's scored at every turn. For every 2, if you have 2 units in the enemy deployment zone, you get 4 points. So it's actually a really good one, line breaker, if you can pull it off. Now, that's it. So you will be able to score points as guard. What you have to do is deny your opponent the easy secondaries that they can potentially farm from you. That is the key to success with Horde armies, especially with guard armies in 9th edition. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Put loads of comments down in the comment section below. Let me know if you agree, if you disagree. What do you think about Voxcasters? Are they good? Are they bad? I'll be going into those a little bit more in another video. And what do you think about 9th edition in general? After playing a couple of games, I'm pretty positive about it. I think it is as complicated as you want it to be. But from guard and whatnot, I think we have the potential to really dominate on objectives and also deny secondaries. And if we can do that, guard will be really difficult to stop. Really difficult. And on 4 objective games, when all you need to do is hold 3 out of 4 objectives, I wouldn't want to be my opponent in that game. When I rock up with my Mordian 50th rifles, and I've got 108, I've got 18 infantry squads, and I've got boatloads of Bulgans and veterans on top of that, I would not want to be my opponent, because I'm throwing 60 infantry and a squad of Bulgans onto each one of those middle ground objectives, and defending my objective with another 60 infantry. I would not want to be my opponent. My opponent in that game is only going to get the bare minimum primary points. I guarantee it. Anyway, hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. And of course, I'll see you guys next time.